review on from Monday.
You bet. Thanks. I didn't get the opportunity to provide or to create any formal notes for myself or put together a formal update. So I'm just going to wing it here a little bit. And I know a number of you were able to join us last week on the 25th. Was that last week or was that this week? When was the 25th? That was this week. It was Monday. See how prepared I am? Talk about going from one Zoom meeting to the next. So it was Monday evening from 6 to 8 p.m. We had a public information session as we described last week. And that was pretty straightforward in terms of offering a presentation that provided an overview of SB 762 generally. And then we focused in on both the landscape program that you all are here to discuss, as well as the small forest landowner program. Kind of took those in two separate pieces, and then just opened it up for some Q&A. And I think there was, some really good conversation and some good questions raised as well. A lot of the discussion actually focused on the small forest landowner grant program. Alex put some good details out there about some of the criteria for that program and how it's shaping up along with the timeline. And I think there were a lot of folks on the line there with organizations that are interested in that. And so we had a lot of good discussion there. There were fewer questions about this larger grant program, but certainly still a robust conversation there. And they were, I'd say, a little bit more high level, as you might expect. I didn't sense a lot of concern from the feedback that we received on this side of the on this particular program. You all should have in your inbox a message that we received through the mailbox, I think this morning, that Megan sent out, which outlines some good questions and some good perspective. And that individual asked us to ensure you all have that by today's meeting, so it is there. In terms of process moving forward with that meeting, I know that a lot of the dialogue was captured. Of course, it's recorded and it's available if you want to watch it. But a lot of the dialogue was captured in the comments, and we'll be looking to collect those and summarize them. We also have opened a period between the 25th and 5 p.m. on November 7th for folks to submit written comments to us. And as soon as that closes up, we'll take what we receive and summarize it and get it to all of you.
Ryan, would that be the 1st of November or the 7th?
Sorry, that would be the 1st of November. Thank you, Jeff.
Okay. Sure.
7 days. That was 7 days from October 25th, which makes it the 1st of November. So shortly thereafter, we'll get all that stuff summarized and share it with all of you. In terms of next steps, I haven't really had a chance to talk with Jeff or others on the team, but my thought is that it might make sense to offer another public session at some point in the future when we have some final materials to roll out, so that we offer the opportunity for folks to get that stuff digested and ask any questions that they might have as they start to look to put proposals together. So I guess I'm springing that a little bit on the team here. So I apologize for that, Jeff and others, but that's been in the back of my mind and think it might make good sense. So I'm going to just stop there and invite anyone else who participated, if you have any other perspective you want to share or any other ideas or questions from the rest of the group.
I would just say that I thought things went really well at the public meeting, and I think it's a good idea to do another one once the materials are released, because I myself have just received a lot of questions since the meeting, and I think that would be really helpful for applicants.
Yeah, I unfortunately I was traveling, was unable to join, but I have heard from multiple partners that it was a very well done and very informative. So thanks to ODF for putting that together on fairly short notice. And yeah, I'd be supportive of kind of a Q&A once the RFP is released. I don't want it to hold up getting the RFP out. I think we should strive to get it out there, but if people want to have kind of an informational session about filling out the forms and answer any questions as they're looking at those materials, I think it'd be valuable if you could make some time available.
Yeah, I agree. We got a lot of great clarifying questions during that information session. And I think it just helped, you know, me to think through some of the things surrounding the RFP, and maybe opening up a few bigger questions that maybe we'll get to today, maybe we won't, as we go through the RFP and see how we can incorporate it. One question I have is, you know, if there's a public comment period open until Monday, and we're looking to get the RFP out maybe as early as the end of next week, I do want to make sure there's time to actually incorporate any feedback that would be relevant to the RFP. So we've got this one comment, but that we might get more, you know, at the last minute. So just to be, I mean, some of them might not necessarily inform what we put out, but I just want to make sure that, you know, in all fairness, there's that opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that the original timeline is a little bit tight with that 7-day period, and totally agree that we'll allow the time to make sure we can receive and digest all of that information without, I think, slowing things down too much.
Ryan, this is Alex from ODF here. One thing I would add is the comments that we got on the Small Forest Land Grant Program, which we did kind of show some folks what the criteria were. They were clarifying questions that didn't change the narrative of that program. And so I think, you know, if the public has time to comment, it will help clarify, and we'll find a couple nuggets in there to update. But I don't imagine it would change it so much that, you know, draft RFP that was released would look drastically different. Let's see.
Yeah, I think that's good perspective. Well, I appreciate again the time that both staff and all of you invested in participating in that, and appreciate your time here today. So unless there's other comments or thoughts, I'll turn it back to Jeff.
Yeah, the only thing, thanks, Ryan. The only thing that I would add is, you know, our staff here has multiple opportunities throughout the week and into the future, I'd imagine, to visit with, you know, groups of folks out there as well. And so yesterday I did a presentation where I just reiterated what we went over on Monday to a new group. Chris, you were there. Thanks for that. I really, you know, I'm sure that most people figured that out and had a general sense, but I'm sure I reached a few new people in that group too. So we'll continue to provide that. It's our pleasure, I think, really, and that's why we're here, is to outreach to, you know, those folks out there. So there's other opportunities to do that. And if there's no more comments about that, we can certainly move on. Any further comments just at to wrap it up here? Okay, thanks. Well, we did want to touch on a topic that we really haven't talked about yet, although we've been thinking a lot about it, and we've taken some effort over the past few years to really integrate a diversity, equity, and inclusion focus into how we do business. And I'm going to kind of get away from maybe the topic in a sense that what's written in the bill or not written in the bill. And what we have, our marching orders that's on paper maybe for ODF. And I think we can all probably agree that there's just a right way of doing things, and that's what we were striving for. And we're not there, but we can always aspire to that. And what we don't know is what we don't know. And so I had a good conversation with Megan this morning in preparation for this topic. And in my humble opinion, working in rural communities across the country, actually from Tennessee and Kentucky to Colorado to here, we work with a finite base of people. We work with landowners that have land, and that sometimes puts us into a box that may or may not be terribly inclusive of all types of different folks. But we can always aspire to provide outreach and continue to learn what we don't know and take advantage of those moments where we can move the programs into other locations and assist other Oregonians. And with that in mind, I just wanted to mention that yesterday I sent out a quick PowerPoint training tool that we use here internally. We send that out to our new employees and our grant managers in ODF when they receive federal funds, and that's federally focused. If you had a chance to glance through that, you'll notice that is a federal perspective, but one that I think that we can lean on as we move into this new era of utilizing general funds. So we're at a bit of a crossroads, perhaps. We as ODF, we'll have a conversation here pretty soon about updating that, maybe making it a little bit more inclusive to other funds that we might be managing. So that is limited in some sense, but I just wanted to give you a chance to look through it. We don't have to, hammer through that thing today, but if you have a moment, take a look at it. And it gives us kind of a perspective on how we're treating our funds and how we're reaching out to various constituencies across the state, and at least preparing new grant managers for setting some expectations. And so if you had a chance to look at it, great. If not, that's okay. But I would just say that we're looking for those opportunities to move that ball forward to some degree. And Megan is on the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Council here at ODF and can bring us a few more details about where we are as an agency. And then we'll open it up for some conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Yeah, really, the diversity, equity, inclusion was kind of championed by Peter, our previous state forester, and members of our executive team have participated on our the government alliance against racial equality. That's the GARE program, and we have formed a DEI council within the agency. It kind of took a work group to get it started, and then we rolled it out really within the last 3 months. And so there is some capacity there that we also received through the last legislative session to aid in our DEI efforts, like a DEI coordinator, also part environmental justice and tribal relations. But really, that's just kind of what we're doing as an agency. But we're kind of in the infancy stage of it and growing, and really wanting to lean on everything that we can for that community engagement. And so through like the grant process and stuff, what can we do in like a shared leadership approach where communities are involved and actively engaged in the process, these processes from the beginnings, and how can we lean on some of the project managers and what they're hearing and what they need from us and build that into the process. Captures like values, strengths, and resources that can shape the work. And it's multi-directional conversations and mutually beneficial. Two ways exchange in the informations. We're getting their ideas and resources, and they're getting the resources that we can provide. We also don't necessarily have a lot of like the capacity or the resources to say, we can produce this in 15 different languages and something. So we want to just really focus on what we can do and get better at what we're doing. And we just want to directly support these communities and partners through all aspects, the contracting, and just helping them engage in their communities, getting them engaged in their communities and with this, and even considering putting the time and energy and the financial resources into reflecting and identifying lessons that can be learned or improved, and just learning from our mistakes. What can we learn from going back and gathering demographics from all of our grantees and seeing how that can inform or improve our process moving forward. This is really the second time we've utilized general funds in this, and so just leaning in on what other agencies, entities, and partners are doing and how we can really capture that and improve. And that's really kind of what we're doing, is just, this is a starting point and a conversation, and like capturing your feedback and what is already out there that we can just help, and surely like that the people on the ground that really need these in the communities and the underserved places are involved and aware of what is available. It's kind of what I had to say.
Thank you, Megan. The only other thing I would add is during our conversation this morning, which I really appreciated quite a bit, Megan, thank you. We came up with 2 ideas that we'd like to throw by you and just maybe get a sense of where we are. Megan came up with an idea that maybe we have an AAR in the fall. So within the proposals, or excuse me, within this process, the grantees will have an opportunity in October of 22 to send in an interim report on how things are going and some of the outreach that they've provided to communities. It'll be a kind of a mid-step of where we are. And perhaps we reconvene this group in, say, November of 22 and just have a conversation about, are we meeting the needs of the community? What information can we glean from the process as far as a DEI message, and are we doing okay, and is there more that we can do? And then the other is that we're working with EWP as far as monitoring the process. And so I'd like to, turn to Heidi and EJ and some of the folks on that team and really take a look at, maybe there's some metrics out there that we could follow a little bit more closely through that process. So anyway, enough of what I'm saying. Love to hear your feedback. We've got some agency folks on the line too that have been through this quite a bit, and maybe we can learn from you all as well. Eric, I knew it. I was looking at you. You didn't know it, but I was.
I felt your eyes coming through my computer screen, Jeff.
Okay.
So yeah, thank you, Jeff and Megan. And I know this is a tricky topic, and thank you for bringing it up. And at OWEB, we're kind of on a similar path, looking at DEI. And one of the things that we're trying to incorporate, and we're nowhere near there, but is kind of having that lens that applies for everything that we do, not just the separate DEI component, but just as we look at all of our programs, using DEI as one of the many lenses to look at it through. And something that I think that this group could consider is, doing something sort of similar to the best of the group's abilities at this time. And I think of things like criteria, taking just a second look at those and seeing, I don't know, for example, or we weighing workforce, contracted services items and budgets, putting a higher point value on a proposal that has less money going to a workforce than one that might be treating similar acreage but pays a better wage. That sort of thing. I'm not suggesting that would be one of the criteria to look at, but might be included in something if you're looking at it through that DEI lens. So I don't know, just some thoughts to consider. Again, commend you all for bringing it up at this forum. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other thoughts about that? That's a good one, Eric. Thanks.
I have maybe just another sort of suggestion on outreach. And that is just to ensure that we use some of the work that's already been ongoing by a variety of groups, like OWEB, but and many of the people they fund, like watershed councils. I know down here in the Upper Willamette Valley, there's a lot of focus by various watershed councils on DEI, and they have great outreach tools in the communities they work in. So just kind of utilizing those existing networks and experience in doing outreach to communities that, sometimes federal and state agencies aren't as good at reaching. So I'm sure a lot of us are connected to those various groups, and so we can spread the word that way, and maybe do some Q&A with some of those groups as well.
Chandra, do you think that's as simple as making sure those groups receive the request for proposals and adding maybe a narrative in there of some sort, or even in the body of the, email that goes out, of just inclusion and how we'd like to proceed through that lens? Is it as simple as that, and allowing those local folks then to reach out to communities, or did you envision something a little bit more than that?
I guess I was thinking something along those lines, fairly simple, maybe with that request of, hey, we'd really like your assistance in getting the word out to, communities maybe we wouldn't have thought of reaching, that you're connected with, that might be interested. But I think maybe the offer of, and this would probably come with your outreach with the RFP anyway, but an offer of, staff being able to answer questions, even if ODF has available, a translator or bilingual staff person that, can speak to, Spanish speakers, for example. If you have that on offer, including that in an email outreach or whatever form you put together.
Okay, thanks. Great point. And anything else from anyone? Sorry, I'm waving at myself. I have a gnat or something flying around my head and it's driving me nuts. That's an inopportune time to be swinging around, but so be it. That's what's happening. Amanda, please go ahead.
Yeah, so I just had a quick comment. I think, obviously this group is focused primarily on the landscape resiliency grant program, which is different and separate from the small woodland grant program. So I think the methods in which you use to reach out to, to achieve DEI in both of those grant programs is different. In that the audience that would receive this money is different in both of those grant programs. So I just want to be thoughtful of, when we're looking at really treating landscape scale, there's huge needs out there that are not necessarily associated with any specific individual landowner. I'm thinking specifically that there's a whole lot of need on federal lands, right? So how do you weigh that against, how do you include DEI when our largest need and largest landowner that has the most severe forest health issues is the federal government? So I just want to be careful too about how we think about this, and that it doesn't disclude those areas that have the highest need as well. So not, obviously I think that there's a lot of need all over the state, but just to be clear about kind of the audience and for both of those different grant programs.
Yeah, good point, Amanda. I would add maybe that I'm just thinking off the top of my head, I don't know this for sure, but perhaps we reach a different community on federal land if we look at treatments around recreational areas rather than wilderness, backcountry type aspects of it. Not that we're working in wilderness, we'd never do that. But what I mean is, where on the landscape, on a federal landscape, is there more engagement with a different community than another? And that could be as simple as again, looking at the criteria and, when we have proposals roll in, look for those opportunities that may or may not fit that need. So anyway, I'm seeing some other hands. Eric, you've had yours up or no? Is it still up? Okay, Pete, go ahead, please.
I was just going to put into chat. I'll do it after I finish talking, so I don't try to attempt to multitask. A publication that I think could be of interest to this and informative to this discussion, bearing in mind that, for example, communities of color bear a disproportionate amount of the risk from wildfire or severe smoke episodes. There's been some work out there. I'm thinking of this paper by Davies et al. From 2018 called The Unequal Vulnerability of Communities of Color to Wildfire, which I think, to your point, Amanda, it gets specifically at this. Yes, the landowner, perhaps, in some cases, that has a fair share of this need for restoration or wildfire risk reduction, landscape resilience is, federal government, but it's not necessarily those people. There are people who bear the impacts of those events, and they fall disproportionately on sort of vulnerable populations and BIPOC communities. And so I think it's important for us to consider that. I don't know to what degree that falls outside of the legislative intent, but I think it's important perhaps as a criteria that we consider what's known and published in the literature about this very issue and potentially seek ways to include that. I know one of Chris Dunn's, peers and a grad student, PhD student now at OSU, James Perini, did some work when he was a fellow for TNC last year, trying to actually get at this question of how do you take and overlay community vulnerability using some readily available census data along with wildfire risk to try to get at this very question of how do you include these questions, how do you address these questions of vulnerability? So anyway, enough said. I think it's a worthy conversation. I think there are ways that we could consider it even in the context of these landscape resilience treatment projects.
And Pete, did you say that you were going to add something in the chat?
Yes, I'm just not capable of multitasking, Jeff, so I'll do that now.
Oh, no, throw a gnat in there and you're screwed. It's not working for me. But thank you, yes. Chris, I see you with your hand there. What's on your mind?
I was going to just build off of Pete's work. Back in 2019, we created social vulnerability maps and a bunch of economic distress maps for the Wildfire Council. And those did end up in the bill, just at sort of a different section. And then there's some ongoing research here at OSU that's pushing that forward. And it's required for SB 762 more broadly to be added. So we do have that kind of data. At least at census block or tract. And I've used it in California to prioritize communities based on their social vulnerability in response to wildfire exposure. And so we can do that pretty readily and pretty easily if you wanted to include it as a criterion to these efforts. And it's the same thing that Pete's talking about.
Thank you. Amanda, I'm still seeing a hand. Is that left over? It's not there.
No, I don't have it up on my end.
Okay, maybe it's a delayed on my screen over here. Okay, any thoughts? Let's great conversation, and maybe as we go through the proposal, we actually look at adding something. I would say, without any, if we don't have further discussion on it, that perhaps we take some time, step back a little bit, and add some language that at least aspires to a new vision or some outreach in the request, or it could even be as simple as getting it in the body of the email that goes out to our constituents. And that's that's a pretty easy one that we can do. But at least it'll help inform those folks out there that we're looking far and wide. We're really trying for to meet the needs of the entire community. And then when we have that message, perhaps that changes a little bit the proposals that we get back, and that there is a vision for folks to include that kind of lens. Chris, your hand's up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just thinking more along these lines. I don't know where this group landed on the availability for, say, planning grants, if you will, portions of this allocation. Is it reasonable to offer some of these, underserved communities additional funding to help them with the planning efforts that more affluent communities maybe already have done, and recognize that that's a need that they may not be adept at or have the skills to do yet, but offer that, and offer, I don't know, contract list or something where they can seek those services and elevate those proposals?
Great question.
Because I think ultimately that's going to be the need, is they just don't see them fitting into this place because they haven't entered into this realm like communities of Bend or Ashland or other areas that have far greater depth of skills built already.
Yeah, great point. Brenda, please go ahead.
Yeah, just to build on that, are you referring to planning efforts on private land or on federal lands? Because with the timeframes that we have, realistically speaking, I don't know that you'd get a lot of federal NEPA through a time frame to be able to then implement and have it completed by, it's the June 20 of 23, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, if it's private land, that's probably a little simpler. But there's probably maybe a few places that could pull something off, but it would be a stretch, and I would be leery of doing that on federal lands. Unless the money is okay to go to planning efforts and that constitutes it being spent.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, good point.
I don't, Brenda, that I had any. I was even thinking at that level. I was just thinking about their need, because they aren't going to be prepared to ingest $1 million project right now, in many cases. And can we flip that narrative and get them prepared, even if it's prepared in 2 years for the next investment, or prepared later down this road? I don't know, but that's the kind of thing that needs to happen at some point to really serve these underserved communities, is to flip that narrative where they're not always behind and try to get them in front. And that takes some giving more than accepting outcomes.
Chandra, please go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick response to that. I mean, I agree, and I'm wondering, just because of the timeline thing, maybe put a pin in that for the 20-year strategic plan that will be developed over the next couple of years, because I think that's a place where you can be really thoughtful and make some headway.
Great point. Dylan, please go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm definitely open to this, and I think this is on the agenda, but I'd like to have a discussion today about what we mean by planning as far as eligible expenses. I know that that's kind of an unresolved issue here, but I think that should be part of that conversation.
You bet. I'm excited to hit that too. And great segue. Why don't we move into a couple of other points? Great conversation. Thank you. I think we will address a few of those points in just this preliminary budget that I'll roll out here quickly. That'll probably stimulate some conversation on where and how we go. And then when we get into the meat of the body of the proposal, or request rather, we can discuss that a little bit further too. So great. Thank you so much. I'm going to do some sharing here, and keep in mind that this is all really very preliminary, and only I've only thrown this together through a few conversations around here within ODF and recollection of our last few meetings and notes that we've had. So this may get some folks creative juices going. Thanks for the comments there, Amanda, too. Yeah, I'd forgotten. Please continue to comment and we'll capture those. Oh, come on now. Can you see that spreadsheet there? That's as simple as it gets. That is my feeble attempt at trying to capture, to some degree, the conversations that we've had. And I know that that's right on for some folks and maybe not for others. So I'd like to just talk a little bit about that. I'm poised and ready to take notes and add things. The monitoring and reporting is really the concept that Ryan brought to us last meeting about additional support in GIS and software capabilities and how we might be able to build out the program a little bit better and looking at the long term as well. And then we've had multiple conversations, which we can get into in some more depth, and tag and extend, and how does that look, and do we get to some projects immediately there? And then the competitive projects is just that main body of work that we're working on with the request for proposals. And then, of course, there's the 20-year plan and some additional funding above and beyond personnel, because we have in our budget our personnel expense for any one of these that we're working on. So this is in 762. That's the point there. And I'll just listen here for a few minutes. Dylan, your hand is up.
Thanks. Monitoring and reporting, Jeff, is that monitoring and reporting for ODF in response to their obligations under 762, or is that inclusive of the impacts of the selected projects?
A little bit of both, I'd say. I think that we have a line item in our 5518 budget where we're working with EWP to monitor the progress of this program and to help us tell that story. And that's in my mind an internal look of what ODF is doing and how we tell that story. But this particular portion, and Ryan, jump in here, but this particular portion is more of a programmatic database management or governance opportunity that we can begin to get ourselves a little bit better organized and assist those awardees out there with what we think is the proper way to capture deliverables and report them out. Is that a fair characterization?
I can jump in a little bit and add a little bit more context. I really see it as, taking this investment and paying it forward. So thinking out to the future about future investments in this kind of work through ODF and across the agency. We have a real challenge capturing the work that's happening on the ground and reporting it, whether it be to the legislature or to the public or to our funders. I think we have an opportunity here to start to try to address that so we can do a better job of telling the story of the work we're doing and the impact that it's having, really with the intent of being able to attract future investment. And so that's really where my mind is at with this line item. So it's about this work, but it's about the future as well.
Yeah, I think it's an appropriate investment. My question, I guess my follow-up on that is, can monitoring expenses for individual projects be included within their applications separate from this? Because I had this conversation with some partners in Southwest Oregon earlier this week that they would like to have some monitoring dollars to actually look at treatment efficacy and actually be able to quantify the impacts that they've made and then share that as part of their reporting. Do we anticipate that funds will be used for monitoring?
Absolutely. And that is really in the body of the request for proposal document that we're about to roll out, where we can discuss the particular projects and what's happening on the ground. So thanks, Dylan. You bet. Anybody, is anybody just totally opposed to these kinds of numbers? Is this something that scares folks, or is this within reason, do you think, as we move forward? Pete?
Yeah, Jeff, I think my only comment about it, and this is really just relative to the, the division between the tag and the extend and the competitive projects is, and I included this in our comments back on the RFP language itself, but what happens if, for example, you don't get $14 million worth of competitive project proposals, or what if how are we going to navigate that? And it's beyond just the breakdown between tag and extend versus competitive. It's what if we don't get the window that the RFP is open? What if we just simply don't get enough proposals to spend out $19,250,000? How do we solicit more proposals or whatnot? So it's a bit of I'm comfortable with it and assuming that there would be some flexibility for adjustments if we got more or less of different proposals, but.
Yep, good point. In my mind and my humble opinion on this is those projects are going to dictate what this really looks like. These numbers are just for our moment here, just to kind of get a sense of maybe where we'd like to see it go, higher or lower. From what I heard from the group, and this is the process that we're utilizing right now, unless I'm corrected here, is that we are building criteria. I heard very clearly last meeting that we will utilize that criteria to judge the tag and extend projects and judge the competitive projects down the road. And so, the one is one and then two, so we've got an A and a B. And so once we get that rolled out, I think we'll have a good look at the tag and extend. And if that comes in at $10 million of need and everyone's comfortable with vetting those projects against the criteria that we've built, then let's go for it. And that's fine. If it ends up that we don't get that in a comfortable way, that we're all really comfortable with the projects, then we'll move into phase 2 of competitive rollout. But we're allowing ourselves just to take advantage of existing agreements over the next month or so. And so, those numbers are going to dictate what this really looks like. I think maybe the more static number might be monitoring and reporting and the 20-year plan. Amanda, please go ahead.
Yeah, similar comment to Pete. Since we haven't seen that somewhat clean version of the RFP that I think we're going to go over today, I'm not clear on where we're at with the minimum requirement for the competitive projects. So thinking about that, I can't remember what it was in the last version or if it's changed. I don't know if it's changed at all, but that could limit our amount of projects, or it would limit our amount of projects that we could perhaps fund through the competitive mechanism. But I like what you had to say about, well, let's see kind of what we kind of pull through the sieve, if you will, for the tag and extend. But I just want to be really thoughtful about what that means for how many projects would even be able to go through based on that minimum requirement.
Yep. Okay, perfect. So with this on everyone's radar, I think that we'll get right into the proposal, and that will answer a lot of this. So I'm seeing that Dylan still has a hand up, Pete does, but I'm seeing Chandra, which I think is a new hand.
Yeah, sorry, just maybe I'd zone out for a second. And so are we saying to not put a limitation on the tag and extend to see what happens? Because I don't think that's what we wanted to do, but that's kind of the impression I was getting there at the end. Okay, so there would still be a limit, but we don't.
I heard open-ended.
Okay, sorry. So, okay. Yeah, because I see there's a couple of comments about only going up to 50%. And I think it'd be more in that camp. I think it's fine to go over this 25%, but yeah, okay. I think there should be a limit.
Yep, you bet. And I think that's a good point. Like I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but the proposals are going to dictate. And if we find that, you know, we've topped out at 50% of tag and extend, and we get $6,000 worth of new projects in, we're short. So at some point, we're going to have to say, okay, this is we're pushing the envelope with this, and then we're going to go into phase 2 and roll this out. But I think we're all pretty comfortable in our experience of the e-board that we had 8 months ago. We'll get 100 proposals in. They'll ask for $130 million, and we'll have lots to choose from. That's typically the way we see things working out. But, you know, Amanda, your hand just, go ahead.
Yeah, just really quick.
Over here. Sorry. I see.
Yeah, just really quick. I
up.
mean, I agree. I doubt that would happen. I doubt that we'd fall short. But even if that were the case, we have a lot of work to do in the development of the 20-year strategic plan. So, and that is really the piece that's going to grow this program within ODF, you know, hopefully in perpetuity. I mean, we have so much that needs to be done. So I think that it wouldn't be against the intent of the bill to spend more money, you know, if we needed to, if we didn't get adequate proposals that met the criteria. I think that there's other things that ODF could do to really help grow this type of all land shared stewardship program within the department. So I don't think we should be worried about that, but I do agree with Chandra. I do think that we should have a cap on the tag and extend. But I don't think we should be worried about not being able to spend the money.
Okay, let's keep our eye on 50% at this point until we learn more. How's that? Just for conversation's sake. All right, let's move in to the review of the proposal here. And don't be surprised or shocked. I made an attempt to grab everyone's comments and really condense those into something that was a lot cleaner, because frankly, I was starting to lose it a little bit with multiple comments and lots of different colors. I didn't even realize that there were that many colors that could be on a sheet. We were getting into magentas and eggplants and things. I didn't even know that was possible. But as I went through it, I really tried to clean up things that were kind of the real slam dunks, like, hey, we need a comma here, or let's add rangeland. Yeah. So I threw it in there. Now, some of the points that probably warranted more discussion is what I would like to bring up today, knowing full well that this is our process and not mine. Where's the document? There it is. And that, are we sharing, or am I still sharing? Yes. Okay. And so what I did is I added those in red to the best of my knowledge. I have a blank sheet here with a pen. I'm ready
Actually,
to
Jeff,
take more notes. Oh, what
Jeff,
happened?
you actually stopped sharing.
Whoops. I never want to stop sharing. Am I sharing again? Oh, Jiminy's.
No.
There you go.
Okay. What I'm always nervous about is sharing something that is really horrible that pops up, like an email from someone that shouldn't be seeing an email. I'm thinking, oh God, please be the right one. I don't have those kinds of emails, but anyway, here's the document. I added in red just for conversation's sake, so that, you know, we could highlight some of those things. I took a lot of points and added them in there. But really, as I read through this, we are so close. I'm just really pumped about it. I think we're going to get, in the next week or so, we're going to be able to get this out to our folks and get it rolling, which feels really good. But anyway, enough of that. Hi, Derek. I see you've joined. Thank you. So what I'll do, here's my attempt. I'll roll through this just with my ongoing comments. And if we hit a point that feels like we need to stop and discuss, then yell at me, and let's start there and see how far we can get. So anyway, I love the idea. Oh, go ahead.
Hey, sorry, Jeff. It's probably my aging eyes, and my inability to use Teams, but there you go. Thank you.
That is so big now. I got to get back here. Okay, good. I believe it might have been Dallas, maybe even someone Monday night that mentioned Rangeland. I mean, that just makes too much sense. So there it is. I'm going to take it out of red here in a moment. It's official. Makes a lot of sense. This is just a bunch of fluff, a little bit of background. Nothing's changed in here. And frankly, I didn't see a lot of comments on this portion right here. Just some particulars on when it's due, stuff like that. This date, really, I just threw in there just as a placeholder, December 3rd. That can certainly change if we feel like we need to give or take a week here or there. I think
Hey, Jeff,
oh, go ahead.
I've got just one quick question about just the language. I don't think I've made comments on this, so sorry that I'm just doing it now. But
right.
For the work must be completed by June 30th, shouldn't that read work must be paid in full? Or, you know, I guess it's more that the money needs to be expended, not necessarily that the work needs to be completed.
Right. Well, and expended is a really good word that I think I'll add to that. And so here it is, I think as clearly as I can understand it. So work needs to be proven on an invoice before June 30th. So when ODF gets an invoice in July, middle of July, and it says, 3,000 acres were completed and it's invoiced June 29th, then we can pay that. So we have the ability to pay invoices beyond June 30th. We just have to see that the work was completed prior to June 30th. So that's actually pretty accurate there, but I do like, your word expended too, because the work, well, actually, I'm not sure it could be any clearer. That work must be completed by June 30th, now that I'm thinking in a big circular motion here.
Okay, I just want to be clear, because then the next sentence down talks about expended, and anyways, just trying to be clear to those reading it. You bet. And I'll take another look at that. We'll massage it. I think that this will probably come up. Well, I know it will. When we have our awardees out there in January or so, and we pull them all together and have a webinar to help people through the process, we'll talk about this till we're blue in the face, because that tends to happen, which is good. I mean, we're struggling with that concept ourselves sometimes. Chris, I see your hand, and then James.
Just real quick, you would also want a report by June 30th, right? If they were supplying that so that you can deliver that to the legislature?
Oh, of 23?
Isn't that correct? That we need to be able to issue some kind of accomplishment report by that point? And so
it is. It absolutely.
I mean, ideally, you would have the job done 4 months in advance of this, and then you could write the report. But I know we're under tight timelines, and we might need to have those simultaneously come together. But
you bet. There are some reporting items in here, and actually down here too. We'll hope that didn't make anybody nauseous. We'll have an opportunity to look at that down here too in this timeline. So thanks. I'm seeing James.
Yeah, I was just about to make a comment about obligation to contracts, and I read the rest of that sentence. But I'll just point out that could end up being challenging. I know it's required by the law, but we're already running into contractors' ability to get work done. So we're frequently letting contracts, and they have, anywhere from a year to a couple, 2-3 years to finish that work. And so it just futuring out, that could be a bottleneck for folks. And that's all I had to say on that.
Really good point. And here is something I'd like to really kind of bolster the conversation with our awardees, grantees. Is a midstream check-in, and that's what I would rely. We'd have our staff to do that, and that would be in October of 22, where we ask those questions. How are you coming along? Do you have our contractors available? Are you getting close? And then we have an opportunity to go through a modification process, and within the scope of work, that is. We wouldn't go outside of the scope of work because we don't want to change projects wholesale. But allow them to tinker around that and maybe make some adjustments to get ready for, the final push of the project. and meter out some of the work with our contract community as well. Okay, I think this is probably a point that was back and forth. I'd really like to nail it down if we could, so I'll just go through it real quick. Projects are eligible to receive funding, must focus on implementation. We threw out there 70% of the project, not the entire 20 million, but the project cost. And then a portion of the project cost may be used for evaluation and monitoring, and that would be a smaller portion. These numbers we can certainly discuss. You'll notice here that it's again reiterated. And then what is evaluation and monitoring? And so we've got a little bit about that as well. Is that right in here? Oh, of course. It's a little bit more here in this body here, but let's talk a little bit about that and develop this out a little bit more. Amanda, please go ahead.
I don't have my hand up.
Oh,
point,
I did for a minute, but I took it down because you said we were going to talk about it. But because we can't see, the additional examples of what evaluation and monitoring is on your screen. So if we're going to get to that, I just had a question about clarifying that.
Okay, well, let's think about that 70-30 break as we work through this. James, I see your hand, and then Dallas. Did we have some more comments there?
Go ahead, Dallas.
Yeah, I guess I was just going to start off with, I assume that you want to choose either may or must. Yes. And I would probably advocate for a must, just because I think that some sort of evaluation or monitoring should be included in some of these projects. But I'm open for discussion on that too. I just thought I'd put that 2 cents in.
Dylan, go ahead. Dylan, you're on mute.
As I said, correct me if I'm wrong, because we do have some really strong, science experts on here, but 30% for valuation feels a little high. I mean, I want to make sure it's in there, but I might reduce it to 10 or 20. I don't want this to turn into a research project. Because I'm thinking, as for $1 million, that still gives you 100 or 200K for evaluation and reporting, which is substantial.
Shame on you, Dylan.
Yeah, there he is.
I was doing the math too, and I was like, it's $3 million project, $900,000 for monitoring. Whew.
Yeah, all day long, right, Chris?
Yeah, it's a lot.
I would say 10%. I think about programs like CFLRP that recommend a 10% number for monitoring, and especially if we're going to say must and you're going to build it in, that to me is something appropriate in the time frame that we're working in. If you're going to have to monitor what you're implementing, even if it's prospective, you're not going to be able to do an extremely robust, complex framework in that. So I just might make it a smaller number.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that point wholeheartedly. I like that perspective. Chris, and then Chandra. Go ahead, Chris.
Okay. Just first a question. Sorry, I had to miss last time, so I'm still trying to catch up. But I'm looking at the commented on draft that was sent out last week or beginning of this week. So the original category was included planning, analysis, evaluation, and monitoring. Is this still that same category, or did planning get capped off into another one that is to come that I can't see on the screen yet?
Yeah, great point. And I really made a real effort to remove planning from that process. I think most, if not all, comments were really focused on an evaluation and monitoring, but a planning was really, there's other funds out there to focus on that. And then, of course, the short time frame, that how far did we go with planning? Although in the frame up of our DEI conversation today and Chris's point of view there, boy, it's probably worth discussing again. Chandra, please go ahead.
Yeah, I guess in the short description here of evaluation and monitoring, the sentence reads, monitoring and evaluation or other analysis that is necessary for the completion of the project. And I guess I'm not 100% sure on what is necessary to complete a project and what is above and beyond what is necessary for completion of the project. I guess, I mean, monitoring is required in the sense that we have to do reporting, and so that would inform the reporting. But what other sort of evaluation are we talking about? Because I can see where some of it wouldn't be necessary to the completion, but might be really useful, and then we might want to encourage. So the terminology necessary for the completion is what I'm struggling with. What does that mean exactly? And is it possible for a proposal to have additional analysis that's not necessary? And what would that look like?
Yeah, that's a good point. And, you know, I'd imagine that, well, if we decide on may or must, I mean, there may be an implementation project that comes in that really doesn't have any necessity to do anything but do the project and report. And that might change our outlook a little bit. Chris,
Yeah.
I still see your hand, although I'm seeing James.
And
Go
just,
ahead,
sorry, just a quick follow-up on that, just the language that I keep coming back to in the bill language is evaluating various types of field treatment methods. And so that's the sort of thing I'm thinking about. How would you, is that the sort of evaluation that could be funded? Is, you know, sort of effectiveness of the field treatments or that sort of thing. It's not necessary to complete it, other than we're saying that we want them to do it. But it's something that's in the bill as a suggestion.
Right. Good point. Chris, you still have a hand up?
Yeah. Just follow up on Chandra's comment. Yes, there's great things that you can do in reporting beyond just effectiveness saying, yeah, we did the acres, but we have a really good example from our OWEB SIP project that Eric Hartstein funded and Chris Dunn did the monitoring on that I'd be happy to provide if anybody was interested, involving the pods approach. So yes, those things can be really meaningful, and those results can go far beyond just reporting, but actually into operationalizing the fuel reduction on the ground to something that firefighters take advantage of during fire season. But that wasn't going to be my actual comment. Going back to the planning piece, you know, in linking that back to the DEI conversation, if planning can only be 10% of an implementation project, it really puts any applicant who might be challenged to meet the match requirement to put in for a project that needs a significant amount of planning. And if we want to be seeding projects for the future, if I have to implement 90% of a project and I can only plan 10% of it, that's probably going to preclude me from applying if I don't have a lot of previous capacity developed. So I would almost say that planning needs to be a separate category in and of itself, so that entities that don't have a lot of capacity and may come from some kind of underprivileged background can actually engage in the planning process and come up with a meaningful collaborative project without having to figure out how to find a 25% match, and at the same time, in a very short timeline, implement 90% of an award, which is again, I would just suggest is prohibitive to inviting those folks into play in this game.
Understood. Thank you. James, your hand's up.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's a really good observation. Regarding the evaluation and monitoring topic, when you sent out that draft earlier in the week, one of the comments I had put in there, which may have led to the necessary, that is necessary for completion of projects, is at least on the BLM side, we frequently have the requirement for archaeological or botanical surveys to be happening prior to implementation. And originally that topic included doing surveys potentially. And I think that's where that language came from. So if there's an opportunity to actually still protect those sorts of activities within the acceptable granting process, I think that would be a good stroke. those surveys are required by the already signed decision, but they have to happen prior to the implementation of the project. So there's a sequencing that happens there.
Yep, good point.
Jeff, can I just ask if we do that we clarify that in the RFP about the timing associated with that? That what has given me the greatest concern here is that, and again, when I say what we mean by planning, I do not want to see additional dollars going to planning, particularly on any public acres and on doing surveys and assessments and project design that will not be implemented within this biennium. But if it is like something that James is talking about, which is we have to do that survey to move to implementation, we already have a signed decision, I think that's an appropriate, just like we would with private landowners, need to do a management plan and outreach and engagement and communications. But I would want to clarify that so that people don't start submitting applications for, additional surveys, assessments, et cetera.
How might we limit that aspect so that it is not an entire planning project over a 2-year period or 18-month period?
I would just throw out the idea that you could simply say something along the lines of funding surveys or funding surveys that are required as part of an already signed NEPA or environmental decision.
Yeah, and it might be something along the lines of further breaking down implementation and what we mean by it. Yeah, or technical assistance, that's fine. I would be worried if somebody, I guess, I don't want to see another basin fuels reduction strategy. We want $500,000 to determine a fuels reduction strategy for this watershed. So it needs to be language that's specifically moving towards implementation of an agreed upon landscape and existing area, something like that. And the agency staff on here probably have a better idea on the appropriate rhetoric and grant making language they use.
Chris, I see your hand, and then Dallas. Chris, that might be a leftover. Chris Chambers, sorry.
No, sorry, I was take it down.
Okay, Dallas, please go ahead.
Pete put in the chat what I was just going to say is, can we just specify any planning that occurs has to be for work that will be implemented within this biennium? I think that would be a pretty easy way to include that language.
I like it a lot. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think that would be appropriate. And would exclude full-scale planning projects.
Yeah, that's a good point. That kind of circles me back to, and I'll add this language back in evaluation and monitoring as well, but then what do those numbers look like? Do we want to go back to that point and say 70% is earmarked for implementation, 10% is evaluation and monitoring, and 20% is for planning, or some variation of those numbers? Chris, I see your hand up. Chris Chambers. Sorry, there's two Chris's. Sorry about that.
Yeah, thinking about the planning thing a little deeper, I'm not opposed to saying planning has to be for a project that's implemented in this biennium. And I suppose folks who might not have a lot of capacity could just propose a small project, and that gets their foot in the door. They don't have to propose, a $1 million project. They could just propose a $100,000 project where the planning is a small part of it. I would hope that the percentage that we come up with for planning is enough that it allows folks to get the necessary planning done to get to implementation. So for instance, going out there and recruiting private landowners to participate in a cooperative fuels reduction project. We've got a lot of experience doing that down here. It takes a lot of front end work to get those landowners involved. 10% might not be enough to make that happen on the planning side. But it's it's a good down payment on that. And yeah, there are other grant funding sources that folks could probably look into. But another way to think about it, and I'll just throw it out, not we don't seem to be trending in this direction, but planning, if it were a category, could just be capped at a dollar amount. That way you don't have, you know, huge projects sucking up $100,000 or more dollars in planning. If you just capped planning overall at, like, you know, of the 20 million, planning was only 500,000 or 250,000. That way you don't end up sucking up inordinate amount of funds for planning, which I agree is a concern.
Okay, point taken. Chandra, please go ahead.
Yeah, Chris, you really prompted me to think about how we're kind of leaving out a key thing that could help us address a couple of different issues that are going on here, including you know, DEI, and also one thing that we haven't really talked about at all, but is talked about in the bill, is seeking and enhancing opportunities for collaboration. So we talked about, as far as doing the sort of public outreach, stakeholder engagement, that sort of end of a project that could help, I mean, that really can help with implementation on the ground, but takes a lot of front end. We don't really have anything that defines that that's a possibility. But maybe what I mean, we could define what we mean by that in this document. And maybe the simple way of getting at some of these breakdowns of percentages is just to say 70%, you know, needs to be on the ground implementation, and then these other things are possibilities with the rest of the funds. But I think adding in that sort of, I'm not sure what we want to call it, stakeholder engagement is one way of phrasing that. But I think we might want to consider adding that as a possibility for funding or criteria for selection. Is, you know, maybe we encourage that sort of outreach to build community support for a project, because that, I mean, we all know that helps get things done on the ground faster.
Yeah, good point, Chandra. And Amanda, before I get to you, I might just add a little perspective from ODF's point of view, at least, and how we've been managing these. There are proposals out there on the ground that have excellent managers. They're not, they don't need to be micromanaged. They've got the vision to do good work on the ground. We're just putting together a call for them to develop a proposal to send into us. We have the ability to look at those proposals, give them a call on the phone and say, hey, you know, what are you thinking about this? What does this mean? So we're just painting some sideboards to get a good proposal in that makes some sense. There's opportunities to discuss it with professionals on the ground, and wiggle around a little bit until we get it just right. So I would caution of getting so terribly deep into exactly managing projects on the ground that we don't allow those people out there, those professionals, to make these things happen in their own way, because there's a lot of expertise out there too that will spoil. And that's not a comment from anyone in particular. It's just a general thought that I was having. So Amanda, please go ahead.
Yeah, so that kind of prompted me to think of two things. So I think, just kind of going off of what Chandra and Chris both said there, I think that really helps. It really identifies to me, I guess, some of the differences in opinion within this group about where landscape resiliency should be done in the state. Kind of, you know, what Chris is talking about is kind of in and around communities. You know, where I think landscape resiliency should happen is really on large NEPA ready lands that have huge, you know, health crisis issues on them. You know, looking at a combination of large thinning and non-commercial work and large landscape prescription fire projects and things like that. So I guess that just kind of points out, obviously, we're never going to agree on everything, and just that there are a difference of opinion within the group of where those projects should occur. Because then that kind of dictates, you know, the projects that I'm thinking of in my own brain are not necessarily those that I would be knocking door to door trying to get people engaged in. I'd be thinking more on you know, BLM, Forest Service, large landscape, NEPA ready, shelf stock, things like that. So anyways, just want to point that out, that there is a difference of opinion there. And then related to kind of the planning piece, and sorry, Chris, not trying to throw you under the bus here, but we did talk pretty extensively about this at the last meeting. So you're at a little bit of a disadvantage. But the other thing is, you know, I think when we think about legislative intent, the problem with the e-board and how we've done this work in the past is that they've been a bunch of one-offs, that there really was no strategic lens across the state to focus our limited resources. And so I think part of the problem that I have with including planning is that without something like the 20-year strategic plan, we are always going to be doing one-offs that really do not think about the full holistic needs around the state and focus those limited resources in a strategic way. That doesn't mean that, you know, these smaller projects and other planning projects that we might think about are not worthy. I'm not trying to say that at all. I'm just trying to say that I think that there's been this identification of and recognition that we've really kind of done these kind of one-off projects and not had a strategic lens. And I think that's why there's so many comments about, well, let's really kind of not couch, you know, I don't want to say that we need to couch all planning for the 20-year strategic plan, but I think that that's where we were trying to get to in the bill, to really have this strategic lens when it comes to what do we need moving forward.
Good points, Amanda. Thank you very much. I tell you what, let's this really is a crux of the proposal right here. Let's circle back to it. Let's sleep on this, so to speak. I don't mean that. Don't fall asleep. But let's move on a little bit to maybe some smaller rocks that we can break up, and then circle back to what this looks like, because I think that some of these will be pretty easy and it'll allow me to move the document along a little bit further. For instance, I think we agreed that a 75-25 match. Why did I have a requirement in there? Strike that. I liked your language, Chandra. Encouraged to meet 75-25. Are we all pretty comfortable with that? And then I tried to define what match could be. Okay, I think and really in the context of the evaluation, monitoring, implementation, that percentage of projects, you know, we originally really were talking about 3 to 5 huge landscape scale projects in the sense of an RCPP or a Joint Chiefs. Actually, very little, probably single landowner defensible space type projects. That there's other funding sources for that. This was a much bigger concept, and so, you know, I thought that a $300,000 minimum might even be a little low. I mean, I'm hoping for projects that come in that won't be less than $1 million. But anyway, that's just my opinion. But I wouldn't mind hammering that here and buttoning that up a little bit, as far as what the minimum project and then what kind of cost we'll accept for equipment would be. Any comments about that?
What are eligible equipment purchases, Jeff?
Well, I don't know. What we've seen in the past are things as far as chippers, you know, chainsaws, chaps, hard hats, gloves, things like that go to helping the project along. You know, there are probably many out there, many projects that have all that. They're ready to go. This is a matter of just contracting things out. But we see sometimes in projects that really need a little bit of that additional support to help get things started on the ground. I'd be real careful about funding, you know, pickup trucks and things like that.
Just for the group's awareness, the Small Forestland Grant Program right now is capped at 300,000. And then the Western States Fire Managers, which does a lot of that kind of smaller defensible space stuff, is also a 300,000. So that's a pretty typical kind of small end cap. But just awareness there.
The minimum is tough because I agree, Jeff. And I mean, I think when the legislative intent, when this was put together, the idea was to do fewer, larger projects and being able to demonstrate change and to treat enough of the landscape to actually have a demonstrable change and to look at that treatment efficacy. And to me, that is like, you know, at least $1 million. But I do know that with some partners within this time frame, that their ability to contract it out and to complete that work could be challenging. And, you know, would we kick out a project at 750,000 that was part of a larger, you know, $6 million landscape, and to say, hey, we want this much money as part of the overall landscape. So maybe bump it up a little bit to like a 500, but I think we also need to think about cumulative budgets as well, because I could see somebody come in for $1 million or 500 or 700,000 that would have 3 million in match and basically say, we've got different pots of money that we're going to be implementing. And if we have to spend this in the next year and a half, going above and beyond, that's going to strain our existing contracting capacity.
I think that's a good point. Amanda, your hand is up, and then I see Chandra as well.
Mine must be lingering on your side, so go to Chandra.
Chandra, please go ahead.
And I think Dylan just captured what I was gonna say, but yeah, I wanted to be, we might need to add a little bit of language to clarify this a little bit more, but that the total project cost is different from what the grant request is. And because that's right. I mean, we might only be funding $100,000, but it's a, you know, over $1 million project that would be accomplishing the landscape scale that, you know, that we're most interested in. So yeah, we want to make that clear.
Yeah, this is a good point. And this is a sticky wicket with us, really, because kind of behind the scenes as we manage these, it's really a strain on, not that we don't mind working, but it's a real strain on our staff. I mean, what if we process, you know, $300,000 grants, that is much more of an issue for the whole mechanics of getting these out the door than it is if we have $5-6 million grants or whatever those numbers are. So the idea of kind of rolling these up into larger projects is what we're encouraging, knowing full well that there's different components of the project that will be, you know, smaller and need to be more finely tuned on the landscape.
So
But
that's a
yeah.
really good point, Jeff,
Please
and
go
I
ahead.
appreciate that perspective, because you're right, it is more work to get out small grants proportionately. I wonder, shoot, I had another thought. Oh, I wonder if we also then need to be clear somewhere in what we're calling a project, because I could see, I'm thinking about some, you know, federal partners, for example, who might be submitting a proposal, and there might be different how would they bundle potential treatments that are maybe across two smaller areas, but they, you know, would it make sense for them to bundle it into one proposal, for example, and how might they do that where it makes sense to kind of like meet that threshold while still remaining a viable, you know, project that fits together. So I am not an expert at writing proposals or implementing projects, so maybe that clarity is kind of built in here for those in the know, but that might help take care of the issue of small projects. Maybe they could be bundled together to make a bigger project.
You bet. And that's what I struggle with, that next word in red, entity or organization. I mean, you know, that's another talking point. Real quick before we get to Eric and then Dallas, I would say that there are also opportunities, and we've done this in the past, where you get in the similar or same landscape, you know, that you get a $300,000, you get a $400,000, and all you do is make a phone call and you say, hey, John, you're managing this private land. Sally, you're managing this federal land, and there's a fence between you. How would you guys like to put this together in some way, shape, or form, build out a bigger project, and we'll manage it that way? And it's as simple as that. Eric, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. And I definitely appreciate the desire to have larger grants and the management capacity around those. Question I have on kind of that minimum is getting back to the equity piece. If that would be a concern, if it's a higher minimum amount, if we may be cutting out some of maybe the underserved communities that may be just trying to get their foot in the door at this point with a little bit smaller project. And then also, and I don't know, I see Dallas has her hand raised, and how these limits might work on rangeland projects.
Great. Dallas, go ahead, please.
Yeah, Eric, you took the words out of my mouth. That I was going to say exactly that. And yeah, as far as the rangeland piece, I've put my feelers out there and tried to share this with people who I think might have as close to project ready things percolating. But I think I was really comfortable with the $300,000 minimum. I think that type of money can be spent really easily and still, from the rangeland side of things, have like well thought out projects. But as you increase that, we run into the same issue with contractors and things like that. And I think that you start cutting out the possibilities for quite a few folks.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I would also say that in an overall general sense, I think what we're trying to do with this is to get the word out there to folks that there is a reasonable ask, and that, this isn't the business we're not in the business right now of accepting hundreds and hundreds of projects that are $30,000. That's just not the intent of what we're trying to do. So lowering it to 300 and then having the ability to review those projects in a month and a half and kind of put the pieces of puzzle together ourselves can make a big difference. So I put 3 back in there, and I'm not going to make eye contact with any of you again. Okay, just kidding. We can talk about that, but let's talk a little bit about equipment. And I'm seeing very obviously, to roll this out to everyone this afternoon and spend a little bit more time here with the nuance of the language. We'll do that. But an equipment perspective, is this reasonable? I think this is the way we've been doing work in the past. We're not trying to build someone's arsenal of weapons in a warehouse somewhere. Amanda, please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, kind of to talk about that contractor capacity piece, I'd be curious, would any of this be able to, it's not going to be like AOL's members that are applying for these grants, right? It's going to be groups like SNW and others that engage in this type of work, and TNC and the like that are on this call. And so, trying to get at some of the other pieces of 762 that talk about workforce development, I think that it clearly should be included in here. I don't know that the 20% makes sense, but I am curious as well about how do contractor capacity has come up multiple times on this call. So this perhaps is not the right method to increase contractor capacity, but just I'm curious from those that have engaged in these types of grants before, if there's any push down that, contractors that you typically work with, can you give a portion of that money for them to buy equipment, or does it have to be equipment bought by the applicant?
If I'm tracking with you, and please correct me, what we have typically done using federal dollars is, we'll engage in an agreement with an entity. Let's say, AAA, whatever. and there's a $300,000 grant. Now they can provide to a subrecipient a line item of contractual obligations or expenditures, a better term for it. So within their budget, they've got personnel time, they've got overhead, they've got some of that, and then they're managing the project. They might even add some expertise through their personnel and their travel expenses, but there's a line item in there of contractual of $200,000. So the majority of that $300,000 grant is going to be a service. And those folks show up, they cut trees with their own equipment. Whatever bill they send them is their bill. You know, they have the ability to go out and prepare and bid on a project just the way they would in the private sector. And so there is that opportunity for those folks on the ground to build capacity in that way. But we're not really judging that. They're providing a deliverable of acres treated, and what their expense is their expense.
So if a subcontractor needed to buy something to be able to get the work done, that wouldn't be considered under this equipment purchase cap.
No, that's getting the job done. It's as far as deliverables. If they're going to treat 300 acres, they've got to be able to do that. But typically we're not going and looking at a private contractor and making an assessment on whether they have the right equipment or not, or
Okay.
amount.
No, that's helpful. I just want to understand that a little bit better. So I think that helps. So that as I engage with our members, because I mean, it's a heavy lift in a lot of ways. You know, loggers are loggers because they want to be loggers. They're not loggers because they want to be, fuels treatment specialists. But there's a lot of work in that realm. So I'm trying to encourage our members to diversify and pivot. And if there's opportunities for them to be able to, work with some of these partners in this type of, way, but they don't necessarily have the equipment or the knowledge, I don't want them to shy away from it. So I'm just trying to better understand what can and cannot be allocated. So that I think that's helpful. Thank you.
Sure. Here's another quick example that's even outside of the realm of equipment is expertise. So oftentimes, even in a NEPA process, there has to be an archaeologist on board, and we'll just simply contract out. And that's $200,000 of contractual obligation to that particular person. And so whatever the services may be out there are within that agreement. I see Eric and then Dallas and then Dylan. Maybe my hands are crazy over here. I'm sorry.
Yeah, my hand's down. Yes.
Okay. Dallas, your hand is down. Okay, Dylan, you're up.
So this one's a little weird. I mean, I know it's been offered in the past. It's a little weird for me. In our experience on contracting these out, I have not put together a proposal where we've identified specific equipment that we wanted to secure for it. I mean, we have just bid it out to qualifying entities, and then to your point, Jeff, the expectation is if you put in a bid on a $500,000 job, you're going to have the necessary equipment for primary, activities as well as safety and emergency equipment on site. And you're going to take care of that. And that's going to come along with all your insurance and all your bonding and all your liability. Right. And I wouldn't want to get involved with a contractor if they didn't have equipment and they told me they needed equipment to do the job. The only area where I guess I might have some questions about that is related to prescribed fire and some of the fire activities, is if there is a legitimate gap in some of that equipment that would be needed for some of this stuff. And I would defer, to some of the folks who have more experience there if they've identified those issues. Amanda, maybe I'm wrong. I mean, I don't know. I mean, if you know your contractor base better, that maybe some of them don't have the equipment that they need, but I haven't come across it in my experience. And usually most of these outfits generally have the type of stuff necessary for this type of fuels reduction activities, in my experience, at least. So I don't know. I don't know if I do a percentage. I might just cap it at a dollar figure overall amount, but I'd keep it pretty modest.
Here's a real quick example. I hope it's real quick. Is that sometimes we see projects that come in that are partially managed by an ODF fuels crew on a particular piece of property that they're able to work on. And this happens with our FFR program as well. in that, and then there's other portions of the property that they don't have the expertise or the wherewithal or the experience or whatever it is, to work on another piece of property. And so we may get an equipment cost in that is very specific to new blades for a chipper and some extra saw material for an ODF crew. And that is a line item that is actual equipment that we are through the grant. And so we will highlight that. The other line item for the other portion of work is totally in the contractual line item. And so AAA Tree Service is going to come in and do 60% of the work, and they better just show up with their equipment because they bid on it. And that's where we kind of parse out that equipment cost to the grantee and then the contractual items that someone else, a third party, is going to be taking care of a portion of the project. Dallas, please go ahead. No?
I still don't have my hand up. I don't
These
think.
hands are flying at me so fast. Holy smokes. What's going on here? It was a gnat and now it's a hand. Okay, I don't see any hands right now. Okay, so, you know, we can stick with this. Again, it's 2:40, so I appreciate the conversation. We're going to have to roll this out and have some more edits here, I think. But the idea is, you know, that's a focus of some percentage that just the intent, I guess, is that people aren't out just buying a bunch of equipment. They're actually accomplishing acres treated and things on the ground and implementing. And so I would say there's some probably lift here that is necessary.
So Jeff, just to close the loop on that, because I agree with that, just to put it to bed, I think I just leave it as is. And then this group, NODF, ultimately reserves the right to reject those and or to propose a revised budget to say, we like everything you put together, your equipment costs are too high, do you still want to do it without that? So I would just leave it at 15K.
You're saying, Dylan, you're saying take out the 20%?
Yeah, I wouldn't do a percentage of the overall budget. I'm also thinking about just like the scrutiny here and audits and looking at how these dollars were spent. And obviously we want to show good expertise and good judgment here, but if I'm looking at basically subsidizing and paying $100,000 or $200,000 worth of equipment costs for a private entity here with this money, it raised a lot of eyebrows in the legislature.
Amanda, please go ahead. Wrap us up.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you know, I don't necessarily think that a percentage is bad, because I do think that a $300,000 project is much different than a $2 million project, and $15,000 worth of equipment may be okay for a $300,000 project, but maybe there is additional needs for a $2 million project if we get one that's $2 million. But I think 20% is way too high. So maybe there's a sliding scale, depending on how much, you know, your overall project cost is. But I would agree that 20% just seems ridiculous to me.
Yeah, good point. I think we're recognizing that there's a portion that may need to just help people get off the ground and get going, but that's not the intent of the program. It's not a small business loan. Okay. Entity, love it. Okay. Let's move a little bit into, I wanted to address this. Dylan threw this in there, and I just wanted to define what TA was and how that might fit. Dylan, can you describe what you're getting at there for the group? There were a lot of questions from folks about what that meant.
Sure. Yeah. So, you know, and this part of it gets wrapped up in planning too, and the definition of planning. But when I'm thinking technical assistance, I'm thinking about all the work that needs to go into developing a management plan, landowner engagement and outreach, you know, public meetings and communications, you know, all that work that needs to actually happen to cruise the site, to do all the site prep, all of that work and outreach and engagement, which is 100% we absolutely should be funding and is totally necessary on that. But I think NRCS does like a 30% cap on TA. I'm not sure exactly what the number is, but it's the difference between all the money that goes into planning and actually putting together the site prep and the management plan and working with the landowners and getting ready to do the work, and then the actual cutting and piling and burning activities.
Dallas, please go ahead.
Sorry, I wanted to go back to entity really quick, not to go backwards. Sorry,
All
Jeff.
right, I'm sorry.
But just really quick, I had a question on this, and I wanted to make sure. First of all, are there any person that is excluded from applying? It can be anybody.
That's really the big question. And again, with the limitation on projects, this isn't the small forest land grant program. And maybe it's just me just putting my head on this and just putting some language in here that explains it. Could be as simple as that. But what we're really trying to do is be able to manage the multiple agreements that are going to roll in with the staff that we have here, and really pinpoint those that could have rolled up that maybe didn't out there in the field. And so it's a matter of just workload and managing that in the, throughout the process.
Okay.
Who can we coordinate with that would be kind of the oversight of the project?
Right. Okay, that makes sense. And then my next question is there any requirements as far as information, like award information being public? As far as like, I have a person who's interested, they have a CCAA, which is an agreement with the U.S. Forest, Fish and Wildlife Service that is private. The name of the landowner isn't made public at all, but are these funds public record? Do you know the answer to that?
I'd imagine they would be. I'm only guessing though.
Okay. That's what I thought. Just want to double check. Sorry to go back.
No, I'm glad you did. Really, I got a little goofy there. Chandra, please go ahead.
Mine was back to respond to what Dylan was talking about on the technical assistance. And I guess my suggestion, going back to how we were defining monitoring and evaluation, is to, if that is something that is okay to spend money on, we kind of define what we mean. And then my suggestion would be that between technical assistance, evaluation, and monitoring, all of that combined, whatever it is that you do, can't be more than 30%, since we've kind of already agreed on the 70% for implementation. So all that other stuff encouraged, it can't be more than 30%, and we don't necessarily have to break it up into buckets, but we need to define what we mean by it, which
I think that's a really good point. That's a great point. Yeah, we really don't need to necessarily get into the nuts and bolts of exactly what people are doing, but we need to give them a guideline of what that means. Dallas, did I see your hand pop up? And then Amanda?
Sorry,
okay.
I forgot to lower my hand.
That's okay. Ryan, I see your hand.
Yeah, just two quick comments. The first, I just dropped it in the chat. In terms of the entity, we just want to make sure that we do define that in a way so that we're developing agreements with legal entities. So I think we'll have to maybe, put some detail around that. And then the question came up about the TA, and it sounds like you guys just settled it, but I was just going to mention that I think NRCS puts 20% towards TA typically in their projects, if that's helpful.
Thanks, Ryan.
I'll try to put my hand down if I can. There it is. All right.
Now I see a foot. Amanda, go ahead.
Hopefully my hand hasn't turned into a foot. But just related to that, I guess, I like the idea that Chandra had about not necessarily having to split it out between buckets, but if typically TA has been at 20%, and I think earlier we talked about there being a requirement that there must be a level of evaluation and monitoring, and I think we said that would be 10% capped, then that would get us to the the 30% perhaps. Right. So I just want to be cognizant that we did have a requirement earlier in the RFP for evaluation and monitoring. So, if we're going to have a must there, maybe it does make sense to separate out, no more than 10% for the evaluation and monitoring and 20% for the TA, especially if that's what other organizations have used.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
But I'm not, if people just want to all put it in one bucket, I'm fine with that too.
Yeah. Okay. Great points all around. Just want to skim through this. We got 10 minutes and then let's try to wrap it up with what the next step may be. Anyway, there were a lot of comments, great comments about some of the language that frankly, I just teased right out of 762 because it just, some of it made sense, some of it didn't. So I did a little bit of massaging in there of what that language was. You'll recognize that as coming right out of the bill. Dallas, your hand's up again? No, it's not. Okay. I'm going to ignore that over there on that right side. Chandra, I do see yours.
Thanks. Yeah. This came up at the meeting on Monday, and then was also in the comment that Megan sent around that came in, and which is about it was the specific example of Butte Falls and the community forest around Butte Falls, and whether that would be, you know, treating that boundary would be would qualify. And this is around the fuels reduction beyond defensible space language. Maybe we just need to define, because yeah, that project seems like, oh yeah, I mean, it's around the community, which makes a lot of sense, and it is pretty big, which and it's not, probably doesn't fall into this defensible space bucket, but maybe we need to be clear what we mean by that, so that, you know, that potential applicant that we heard from at Monday's meeting would have a little bit better understanding of whether that example would fit into this project type. So maybe it's being clear that, you know, what do we mean by beyond defensible space? Do we mean, but how close to, you know, infrastructure are we talking? If we're not, you know, if defensible space is 100 feet or what, yeah, you know, are we talking, it has to be beyond that, but within a certain distance of infrastructure, or what? Anyway, just wanted to throw that out there as a specific example that got brought up.
Yeah, it did. That's a tough nut to crack too, really, because at the same time, the bill is asking another group to define what wildland urban interface is. And another organization is developing defensible space standards. So, you know, there's a lot of moving parts out there. I think for, you know, the intent of this is really getting beyond that and not duplicating efforts, but working a little bit beyond that urban interface. Anyway, I'm seeing Amanda. No. Let me look over here.
Maybe it's just a matter of taking out beyond defensible space and just say fuels reduction. You know.
Let's see, yeah. Dylan, please go ahead.
Just to take a step back, I don't want to derail this, but just to take a step back, one thing that occurred to me, did we get resolution on whether or not funds can be used for admin and overhead costs for the sponsoring entity here?
Right, that's on my list too. As an example, we have a negotiated indirect rate with the federal government as ODF of 14.75%. And that is something that we put into every one of our grant projects for that overhead. And that's really our indirect that goes for all those things that goes for me right now. Although 762 is a little different there. Well, we've got, yeah, there's things happening here. Okay, I tell you what, let's do this. I think we've made some headway. I really appreciate the conversation, but it's pretty apparent that we're going to need to roll this back out for comments. I don't want to short anyone the opportunity to really provide some feedback. I do believe we're in a better spot because this was kind of a mess, and that's fine. I parsed through it as best I could over the last few days to get here, and each step I think we're getting a little closer. With the idea of having this ready to roll, including the November 1st deadline for public comment, you know, next week sometime, I think that we probably are going to have an opportunity to get this out, say in a week or so. So let's really focus on that. But there's just too much here to continue to go down that. I think we can all agree that Megan's name is spelled correctly. We got there. Okay.
Jeff, what are the big ticket items left on the list here that we didn't get to?
Well, really what really jumped out at me, and no answers right now, but Dallas brought up some really good points about what does it look like on the rangeland. And so I added some invasive species treatment, native species planting. May or may not be appropriate. We can have that conversation. But then also some other things. Amanda had brought up some road construction and things like that, of maybe things that do or do not qualify. And then there's some others in here about adding, what are we really looking at when we're talking about the map, and which map are we going with, and not that we need to put pins in a map, but we need to be able to articulate well enough to those grantees out there of how they're going to compete when they pick a landscape over another, when they prioritize at the local level. Are they hitting it pretty close? That's another big rock that needs to be broken. And then a comment of how adjacent to federal lands and how do we prioritize that? Another good comment. That might be, I wanted to put a link in there for the shared stewardship agreement. That's simple. The rest of it was really pretty simple. So those are the big rocks that we probably should continue to discuss. And we got 3 minutes.
Those aren't too bad.
And, we're still getting pretty close, I think, and working on implementation, evaluation, monitoring, and planning, which I think we've come to a pretty good place there. That's really making sense to me. I hope it is to you all as well, that we might go with a 70, 20, 10 kind of a perspective. And that paints the picture for those people out there when they're putting their proposals together of what our expectations are. So let me do a little tinkering. Amanda, just a second. I'll clean this up from our conversation today, get it back out, and we'll have one more hard go at this thing, okay? Over the next 3-5 days, 3-4-5 days. Amanda, please go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to let everybody know that I'm not going to be able to be here next week. So I'm going to do my best to update my boss, Rex Storm. So he will be stepping in for AOL at the next meeting. Just wanted to give you guys all a heads up, and I'm gonna give him the comments that I provided for the RFP. So he's kind of got that, and then give him a debrief on this meeting and the last that were really substantive. So anyways, just wanted to give you guys a heads up.
Thank you very much. Yeah, just to wrap up real quick here. Again, I'll hammer on this a little bit, clean it up. Megan, maybe you can help me out. We'll get this out probably tomorrow. With another opportunity to really cuss and discuss and get down to the nitty gritty. I think we're getting close. I'm really pleased with it. Public comments due next Monday, the 1st. We'll have some time next Thursday is our final meeting. If we all feel that we need to get together again, thanks, Dallas. I see that note. If we need to get together again, we may be able to do that. The other things that I think need to be discussed, and I was hoping for next Thursday to start adding this to the conversation, is the instruction packet that goes with this and the scoring sheet. Because I've heard a few comments of, well, how does that really look when we get these back? I have a scoring sheet that's almost ready that really drives at some of these points that can go out to help paint the picture for those proposals out there. So that's what I'm hoping to hammer next Thursday, is a little bit of wrapping up this whole process into getting ready to send this thing out and giving people time. Any burning final comments? Chandra.
Yes. Thanks for that summary, though. I guess, we're saying this is our last meeting next week, and I guess I had been thinking, I was under the impression that we would probably be involved in the selection of the proposals as to be funded as well. And so if that's not the case,
no, I made a mistake. I made a mistake. There's a pause. So the big push here is to get this proposal out and get it in the hands of folks. That'll give us a month or so to kind of take a big deep breath and just think about how much we miss each other. And then in early November or so, when we get all those proposals back in, we'll have a new process of rolling out a score sheet and everybody gets to read them.
Okay, I thank you for that clarification. That makes a lot of sense.
No, thank you. And really, I want to put this in your bonnet as well, is that what we may have an opportunity if we're funded again. I think we're doing awesome work. Maybe we even circle back with a very similar process that is we're hammering out right now, and this goes on forever and ever and ever, and we do good work for years to come. So think about that. Thanks a bunch, everybody.